So I guess now I can say that I am, after a year of living in Vancouver, moving back to the UK. Hey everyone, it's been one whole year since I moved to Vancouver, Canada, and I thought I'd do a video reflecting on my year here in Canada and basically looking at the things that I've learnt and whether or not I would change anything about it. So on the 7th of March 2022, I left the UK on my own and I travelled over 4,000 miles across the ocean to Vancouver, Canada. I had never been to Canada before, obviously never been to Vancouver before, so this was a very scary experience. I'd never been on a plane on my own before, I'd never travelled on my own before. My partner was joining me a month later because he had to finish work and he hadn't had a visa by the time I got my job offer and when I had my visa. So it was all very much like, what the hell are we doing? Can't even think about it, let's just go. So as I record this, it's just gone past the 7th of March 2023 and it's been one whole year in Canada. And my time here has been very interesting. I plan to share a much more in-depth video about my decision to move back home. I will go into more detail in another video about that, but I feel like that should be prefaced in this video because that will kind of talk about my experience here and it will give some context into how I think about things here and why the decision about moving home actually came to fruition. First things first, the one thing I would say to learn and to really kind of get into when you land here in Canada for your new life is to completely change your mindset and be prepared to adapt. Embrace the whole experience, embrace the different cultures. The way that they do their taxes is completely different to how we do our taxes back home in the UK, so you have to embrace that. Another thing is you have to embrace tipping culture. You have to be able to be prepared to tip your Uber driver, your delivery drivers, your barbers, your tattoo artists, tip at restaurants, at the bar, you know, that sort of stuff. You have to be prepared to go into a completely different, almost, and please don't be angry at me, Canada, but almost a little bit of a American culture in some ways. But Canada does have its own culture as well, so you have to adapt to Canada's own culture. And the one thing I would say about that is that here in Vancouver, a lot of rules seem to be followed, and I don't know if that's just a Canadian thing, but like Canadians tend to like have rules in place and they really like their rules. I'm sure there's probably lots of Canadians watching this now like laughing at me, but it just felt like it's just little things like when you're walking on the pavement or the sidewalk, when you walk in there, you have to walk to the right instead of the left. For ages, I was walking just willy-nilly and people wouldn't move out of the way. So I was stepping aside a lot, and then I did a TikTok video on it and people were like, oh, you need to walk on the right. Now, it did help walking on the right, so I was like, oh my god, there's actually like pavement etiquette, like you have to follow these rules. But the one thing is that in downtown Vancouver, you still get a lot of rude people who just won't move out of the way. But I guess another thing is just adapting to Canadian culture. So for example, in Britain, if you want to kind of do something a bit more social, you might gather for like in the pub, but then you might go out after and you might rely on alcohol to kind of fuel your night. In Canada, well in Vancouver at least, there doesn't seem to be much of an alcohol culture. Now they do keep up in the taxes on alcohol, so alcohol's pricey, so maybe that's something to do with it. But if you're kind of coming over here expecting that sort of culture and camaraderie of, you know, going out, drinking, dancing, that doesn't really happen. A lot of the nightclubs here close at about 1 a.m, 2 a.m. There's more of a like bar culture, there's more of a like sophistication bar culture where like you'll go for food and you'll have like a couple of cocktails, a couple of drinks, but by midnight you're back home. So if you're kind of looking for that, that's not really going to happen. You'll also find as well that Canadian humour is going to be completely different to UK humour. A couple of times I've made like a couple of like jokes and it just hasn't landed at all. The Brits are known for having quite a dry sense of humour, a sarcastic sense of humour. It doesn't really translate here. I mean, it's not the case that they don't get it, it's just that you're not going to really have that sort of banter, if you will. The banter is a lot different here. Sometimes I feel like people will get a bit offended if you know, just make a little joke about something. I don't know, I can't think of an example now, but you have to get used to the cultural differences in that sense of things. That isn't to say though that the Canadians aren't fun. Of course they can take jokes, of course they can throw it back at you, but it's just different to how you would do it back home with your friends back home, if that makes sense. When I talk about the mindset, is you have to change your mindset and basically get out of that UK mindset and go into it completely fresh. And even if things don't make sense to you, even if if you don't agree with the way things are done, you just have to do it. You've moved to a completely different place. And that's something that I would teach myself to do if I was to do this experience again, because, you know, it's going to take ages to adjust. It will take a long time to adjust. And that's another thing that really surprised me. I thought I'd adjust quite quickly. I didn't. So the one thing I noticed that we have a tendency to do is compare Canada to the UK. And I mean, in some ways you're going to have to compare, because when you're just moving here, you need to establish, you know, what works and what doesn't. So you are going to compare. And it's just natural to compare as well, because you've spent your whole life in one place and you're adapting to a new place. The difference is though that you have to adapt. So if you are continuously in that mindset of comparing it to the UK and thinking about what's better in the UK and refusing to see any sort of positives, or refusing to kind of, okay, well, it is what it is, then you're not really going to get on with it. And that's the one thing that we didn't get on with here. Because on paper, Canada looks cheaper. On paper, Canada looks cheaper than the UK, but it's not. The experience of living here is a lot different, I find. And again, I'll go into this in much more depth in a specific video. But when you get here, you're going to find that the UK is a lot cheaper, pretty much across the board. So that's a big adjustment to be getting on board with. Now, another thing that living in Canada for a year has taught me is perspective. And it's perspective on what life was like for us personally back home in the UK. So for years, I always wanted to move abroad. I just couldn't see myself living in the UK. I didn't want to live in the UK forever. I just wanted to completely get out of my small little town. And when I got older, the rest of the UK didn't really like resonate with me. I didn't really see myself in different parts of the UK. Moving abroad was what I needed to do. And I did it, and I'm really, really 100% glad I did it. I will never regret moving abroad. I am like the biggest advocate for people like moving abroad. I know it's expensive, but if there's ways for you to move abroad, please, please, please try and do it. If you're thinking about it, just do it. Because I just think it just completely, it's a growing experience. You will grow from it, you'll learn from it. And like, that's always good. If you're growing, then fantastic. You know, let's not stay in the comfort zone. I've done it now, but it gave me the perspective I needed, I think, because life in the UK wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was. And my life wasn't bad. It was just, I didn't feel fulfilled. I didn't feel like I was achieving anything. I felt kind of stilted, I felt stuck, I felt like I was just in a rut, I felt like I couldn't progress. And Canada offers that, and it really does. I've only been here a year, and like, I've earned the most I've ever earned, but I did end up back in the same job, which I was adamant I wasn't going to end up in, but I did. Another thing is that there are opportunities here. You know, if you really want to kind of grow in your career, then I can see how you would grow in your career. I can see that for myself more so than I could probably see it back home. The other things I've noticed as well is just like little like creative opportunities, because I like to be a writer. There were more kind of resources available to me here, I guess because I'm in the city. So just little things like that I really like could click with, and it was kind of what I was thinking it would be like, and I was excited for that. But what that has taught me is that even though the wages are higher, and even though you can see these more opportunities that will come with it, your quality of life actually isn't better. At least for me, it's completely personal, but at least for me, that wasn't the case. I found that, you know, because I came back, I moved from a place where I could buy a house and I had 2 cars and I was earning less than I'm on here, and I could afford to go on multiple travels per year. I could afford to buy as many books and clothes that I wanted within reason, you know, within budget, but I could buy more. I had more disposable income, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And that was on less money. And moving here, I'm on more money, and all I've done is just work to survive, basically. That's all I've done. The leave here isn't good. I think you only get about 2 weeks leave, or 3 weeks if you're lucky when you're just starting. You're kind of working, you know, your regular, you know, 9 to 5 sort of thing, maybe a bit longer. Your days seem to be a little bit longer here. They were in my 2 jobs I've had here. They were longer than the regular like 9 to 5 sort of thing. I've always worked odd hours, but they were just longer than the 8-hour day. And yeah, I just felt like my life here was more so like working. I didn't feel like I had a life. And I don't feel like I have a life. And that was a big decision. That was a big like factor in us deciding to move back home. There's more of a culture here to work to live. It just seems like there's more of a hustle culture here. There's more of a capitalist culture here. The capitalism shocks me a lot here. And I know we live in like a capitalist world, a capitalist society, but it feels even more so in North America. It just feels very capitalistic here. Everyone's trying to make money off somebody. You go out and you're kind of ripped off at every corner. So that's hard. That's hard, and that taught me a lot of perspective on what life is like back home in the UK. Because you might be thinking, okay, well I live in the UK and my salary isn't great, but hey, I can go to Canada and I can earn 2-3 times more than that. Great, but then the cost of living is a lot higher. So your groceries are through the roof at the minute. They're so expensive here. Food is so expensive. I bought 24 items from No Frills, which is supposedly like the cheap supermarket here. It's not, and spent $130 and like that, and it was basically for nothing. And the same with like I shop at Save on Foods and I'm regularly spending about like $160 again on about like 27 items. It's nothing. It like doesn't get me through the week. I'm skipping a lot of meals. Like the food is insanely priced. So your wages don't actually go that far here. The Canadian dollar doesn't go that far here because everything is so overpriced. Everything is very inflated. And you have like separate taxes to pay on separate things sometimes. And then, so the price kind of fluctuates. Food kind of goes off weight as well. So it's not a set price. So it's very hard to kind of budget. And I find as well that there's more of a credit card culture. A lot of like payments online will only accept a credit card. You can't pay with your debit card unless you're kind of with TD Bank or a select bank or something. Yeah, I find that a lot of like online places encourage credit card, and like the shopping centers will ask you, are you paying debit or credit? And lots of people pay on credit. And I think that's just another culture thing. But again, that's something that's a lot to adapt to. So the perspective that it gave me is that actually a lot of the problems that I thought I had were actually just my own creations. I thought my life back in the UK wasn't great. And I think that was a problem on my part because I think I was comparing myself to the romanticized ideas of living abroad, but also other people's lives and thinking that I could achieve something similar. So I think again, it's your mindset, like I said earlier, but it's also kind of, you can't flee a place when you're the problem, and I was the problem. So, you know, it's that sort of stuff. It's how you approach things and how you adapt to things. But when I consider what I had back home in the UK, I feel like I've taken a step back and I can't see a way to progress here at all. So it's given me a lot of perspective on what the UK does offer and what it gets right, and the life you can lead back home, the things that are more achievable and within reach back home, which I never thought was a thing, but now I realise it actually was. And side note, don't get me wrong, the UK has its own problems. I'm a little apprehensive about going back to the UK, but I know that when I go back to the UK, I will have a much better life than I do here. Trust me, in the other video, I will go really more in depth about this, but I felt like you can't talk about why I'm moving back to the UK without mentioning these things. Like I'll never regret it. I never will regret it. I'm so glad I lived in a city. I'm so glad I lived in Vancouver of all cities. I'm so glad I moved to Canada to experience it. I'm so glad I did something that I always wanted to do since I was a kid. But yeah, I don't think I'll be in a rush to move back to a city anytime soon. Who knows where life will take you, but living in a city is a big thing. Way more expensive to live in a city. If I had known truly how expensive Canada was, I did plenty of research. But if I had known how expensive it was, the reality of the research is completely different, then I would definitely have avoided downtown. And I know people would be like, well, you could have moved out of downtown, but even when you move out of downtown, it's still really expensive here. And for us as well, we had our cats, so a lot of places won't accept us because we've got cats, so that's another factor that we've imposed on ourselves here. And again, this is another thing, a lot of research is so outdated now. A lot of research you see is posted a couple of years before the statistics have gone up or things have changed. So that's something to bear in mind. Another thing about living in the city as well, which I do actually like, is the real convenience of it. So I love being able to like walk around and everything's kind of within reach. And Vancouver is one of these sort of 15-minute cities where everything's kind of in walking distance. So there are positives to living in the city, and that's why I wanted to do it. That's why I wanted to live here. The thing that surprised me here, and again, maybe it's just life experience, I don't know. A lot of it is high-rise apartments, but when you go higher up, the rent increases, and I guess that's because of view. But when you've got a housing crisis going on in Vancouver, in Canada even, like, come on, you can't be charging for the same room just because it's a little bit higher. You can't be charging more money because of that. I don't think you can anyway. I think that's like a problem that nobody's actually addressing. People are talking about ways to fix like the rental crisis and the housing crisis and how expensive everything's getting, because rents are just going up and up and up and up and nobody can afford to buy a house here. The thing I don't hear people talking about is like, maybe there should be more restrictions on how much you can charge just because it gets higher up. And I know the argument would be, well, you know, you're going higher up so you're going to get more of a view. But I mean, come on, like, great, you've got a view, but you still need to be able to afford to eat and afford to pay your bills. And like, I'm struggling to do that, so I can't even imagine what people higher up in buildings are even affording. Vancouver sells itself as North Hollywood. There is so many film productions going on here all the time, and you like, sometimes you just walk outside and there's like a film crew outside and it's a set, and like, yeah, that's pretty cool to see. So me and my partner, we work in film and TV, so a natural reason to come to Vancouver was because there were definitely going to be more film work opportunities. That wasn't the case. I first got here and I had a job offer, which was great, and I would 100% recommend that you get a job offer before moving here. But I worked for an animation studio and the job wasn't what it was sold to me as, and I didn't love it there. I didn't love the management. That's a whole separate issue. But yeah, I left that job. And I ended up in the same job that I had back home, basically, which I was adamant I didn't want to do. So I ended up in that job. Great, because it pays the bills. It pays the most I've ever earned, but I'm the worst off I've ever been. But then a lot of the stuff then is that it's so competitive here, even more competitive than probably back home in the UK. And then the film jobs are union based. I mean, there are non-union jobs, but like, it's really hard to get in with anyone here. Again, because I guess you've got so many people graduating, you've got so many connections. So when you're brand new, not a permanent resident, they kind of don't even consider you. So that's something to consider. If you're here on a working holiday visa, they might not be as forthcoming to welcome you in on the film sets. To sum it all up, my year in Vancouver has been good. I know you might think it hasn't been good, but it has. I've enjoyed it. When I have been able to go and see BC, parts of BC, or go traveling or anything, I've enjoyed it. I haven't been able to go as much as I like, and I really love traveling, and I haven't been able to do that as much as I would have liked to have done. And things are more expensive here, and you don't have as much disposable income as you do back home, at least in my experience. So that's been a massive factor in what you can actually do here. But I'll never regret moving to Vancouver. I'll never regret living here. And yeah, I've enjoyed the year here, but I'm ready now to move away from that. I'm ready to have a life back again. Ultimately, what this experience has taught me is what I want, and the difference between what I think I want and what I thought I wanted to what I actually need and what I actually want. And that, like, this is why this experience will never be wasted, because I've learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about life in general by living here. I've learned so much about other people's lives while living here and the struggles that people go through. And yeah, it's a very valuable experience. So this is why I advocate for it. That I just think you're going to grow, you're going to learn so much about different walks of life and different people and yourself as well. And yeah, that's why I'll never regret it. But the good thing about it is that it taught me exactly what I had, and the privilege that I had in some instances, and what I could still get, and what it is hard to get here. And yeah, that's been a sense of clarity to me. If you're not bothered about owning a house, if you're not too bothered about spending so much money on cars, and you're not too bothered about the cost of living in some instances, and you're more so excited for an adventure, and you're more so excited about, you know, a new culture, doing something completely different, doing something outside of your comfort zone. If you're happy to rent, if you're happy to flat share, then great, this is going to really work for you. But if you are somebody that wants to own property, and you've come from a place where you've owned property and owning cars, and you've had a lot more, you're not rich at all, but you've been able to afford a holiday somewhere, or you've been able to go traveling a bit more often, then this might not be for you. And I think that's something to consider here. A lot of people kind of think that if you've moved abroad, or you talk about life where you've been able to go traveling, that you must be rich. Not at all. And that's the thing, is you think you're worse off in the UK, but actually when you move here, you might actually find that you've got a pretty good life back home. And that's what you need sometimes. You need that reality check, and you need that perspective given back to you. I hope this has been positive. I hope nobody feels like I've like attacked Canada, because a couple of people on TikTok thought I was when I talked about like how expensive it was to live here. But I think experiences like this should be shared, and I think, you know, talking about it really helps. So yeah, I've enjoyed my time here. I've had a great experience and I've learned a lot, and this is what this video is about. Now, I will be sharing some more videos before I leave. I plan to do kind of a cost of food, comparing it to the UK. I know I said that's the mindset you shouldn't be doing, but I want to show that. Another thing I'll be talking about is why I'm leaving, why I'm going back home. And then I plan to share my experience of moving back home. So yeah, stay with me on the journey, and I guess I'll see you for the next video. Thank you so much. Bye.